Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. We're doing regular stage shows there that you can't get anywhere else. Also, 10 channels where you can talk Heat and lots of other stuff on our Discord. Again, it's called Off the Floor, $2.99 per month. If you click on the link that's in the description, you'll bypass the Apple upcharge. So we recommend that you do that. Sign up and then give it a shot for a month. And also check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network, includes Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE, put down $5. You'll get $50 to play right away. It's not a gimmick, and it is legal in the state of Florida again. So we've had people ask, is it legal? Yes. There was like a 1-month hiatus. They came back with the game they came back with, satisfied the state, so it's back. Use the code 5 FIVE, get $50 to play right away at Prize Picks. And now, today's episode.
Down the bitch gang. Five on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Bucker said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust.
You sound scared.
It's about have the guts, we're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
Well, welcome back to Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. I'm Ethan Skolnick, and follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. Make sure to check out the very lengthy episode that we dropped on a Friday evening news dump. That's how the White House people typically do it. We got into everything on Jimmy Butler. So there'll be some stuff that we get into Jimmy Butler here as well, because it's unavoidable at this stage. But we handled all of it, and it held up through the weekend. There's nothing new that's happened over the weekend that changes a single word that I said. And all these reports that continue to come out from national outlets, I seriously feel like they're on a 6-month time lag from the summer. But again, it is what it is. Check out the episode. You want to know anything about how the Jimmy Butler situation got to where it is, how much it actually has changed, all the different parameters, we handled it there. It's trade season. Greg, we're here. I feel like this date should be more celebrated by most of the fans that follow us than the actual date of the start of the regular season. Right? People like transactions.
Yeah, and I mean, to a degree, it's kind of like the lead up to the trade deadline, which we know is our listeners' favorite time of year. So I think that this does kind of officially, and for those who aren't aware of what this date signifies, it's essentially when a lot of the players that were recently signed in free agency over the summer are now eligible to be traded. So a lot larger percentage of the players throughout the league are now eligible to be traded, whereas prior to today's date, and we're recording this on December 15th for anyone, they weren't eligible. So that's kind of where we start. You're right. It's probably a date that we should acknowledge even more, because it also kind of coincides when you're through about 20 to 25 games, which is an assessment period for the Miami Heat. So that tis the season, we shall say.
Yes. Tis the season to hit the trade machine. The Heat, as we stand, you mentioned 20 to 25 games, 23 games, 13-10. Game against Detroit that was added to the schedule. So that's the only game this week until OKC visits on Friday. And the Heat could catch a break there as well. We've already seen Luka didn't play, Embiid didn't play. Who else was missing in this last one? Maxey didn't play with Philadelphia, and there was another one recently that it will come to me in terms of the start.
For Phoenix,
KD didn't play. Correct. Okay, so already all of these stars haven't played when the teams have come to Miami, and OKC is in a stretch where they're playing a ton of games because they've gone all the way to the final of that silly in-season tournament. Which, by the way, is think of how they should brand it, the silly in-season tournament. And so they're in the final of that. So they've got a ton of games, and the Heat have almost no games, and it's very possible that OKC could sit Shea on Friday. So don't be surprised if something along those lines happens. And so Miami is in much better position than they were a week or two ago. They're playing better also. It's not just that they're winning. They've beaten some decent teams in this stretch, and their metrics are way up in terms of, especially on offense, where they've jumped all the way from 20th to 9th at the least at the time of the time of their last game. After their last game, they were all the way up at 9th. Not something that we anticipated that they'd be in the top 10. So they, again, are positioning themselves to get out of the play-in. We've seen Philadelphia just had another injury. Jared McCain is going to be out for an extended period of time. I don't think that doesn't look like the Sixers are going to be able to sort of get their way out of this. I feel like
Agreed.
Right. Best case, maybe they get into the back end of the play-in, and then people talk about them as a dangerous team if some of their players start to come back. But it does not look like they're going to be a threat for the top 6 at this stage. Milwaukee has played better. Again, they've gotten to the final of the silly in-season tournament. They have played better of late, and so they will be more of a challenge for Miami. And Atlanta looks like they have some staying power with that young group, and Trey's playing a little bit better. So it's not a given that the Heat are going to get into the top 6, but it looks better than it looked, maybe again 2 or 3 weeks ago. With that being said, we are going to talk about their trade position here, because I think what fans don't understand, or maybe they just don't want to understand, particularly some of them on Twitter, is you can't like just make a pickup here, okay? Like, and this came up again with this trade for Dennis Schroeder, which Golden State made. And for those who didn't see it, the Warriors are traded the contract of DeAndre Melton, who's out for the season. Okay, so this is a guard that they brought in to essentially back up Curry and play with him at times. And he's out for the season. And I give credit to our guy Timothy Bain to this, because when I was on Floor Yours with him about a week ago, he talked about this being an important marker, this Melton contract, which was going to be valuable for a lot of other teams. And it was. So they traded Melton and 3 second-round picks to the Nets for 1 second-round pick. So essentially, the Nets are taking back an additional 2 second-round picks and an expiring contract, which the Nets are trying to get lean. That's what this is all about. We've talked about this as it relates to Jimmy Butler, that the Nets are going to have the most cap space going into next offseason, and unless some other team really guts their roster, which we're not anticipating. And so that does make them somewhat of a threat for Jimmy Butler, although I keep coming back to, why would they want Jimmy Butler in that circumstance? When they're getting lean, you want to bring in a 35 going on 36-year-old to play up there. So anyway, I think it's more likely that they'll take some contracts they like into that space, maybe as part of a 3-way deal for Butler or something along those lines. It is that they actually trade for Butler directly. But I don't want to do too much Jimmy here. That deal, though, led fans to say, well, the Heat could have done that. Why couldn't they have just traded a couple of second-round picks to get us Dennis Schroeder? I mean, again, forgetting the fact that Terry Rozier, whether some fans like it or not, is still on the roster, and they gave up a first-round pick for him. So, I don't know that you're bringing in Dennis Schroeder to take Terry Rozier's minutes further, and then you have no trade value for Rozier in the future. And then, of course, Greg, it led Heat fans to then say, well, why don't they just trade Rozier to the Nets? To which I say, the Nets are trying to get lean. Why would they want Rozier's $24 million, or it probably end up being $22.3 if he doesn't earn the incentives, $22.3 or whatever, on their books for the year after, when, again, they're trying to clear contracts that year. So, Greg, that led us to actually go through the Heat's picks. The Heat only have 2 second-round picks through 2031. One of them is not even their own. And so let's get into how that happened. First thing, do you think it's problematic that the Heat are so lean on second-round picks?
I do, just because I think that they're like the exclamation points on deals to some degree to get them done. Like, sometimes it's just enough to feed a team that it kind of just gives them an additional asset, makes them feel like they're getting a sweetener of some sort. I don't want to overstate it, but I mean, you do see like 5 second-round picks being traded for a role player that I think it was Jay Crowder that went for 5 picks. And then he didn't play. Correct. Yeah, it was just what I was going to say, is that it didn't even look like a functional deal that would make any sense. So I think it depends on what team you look at on if second-round picks are actually valuable or not. And I just think it reinforces a larger thing about also the Heat. When they've been in these star-chasing exhibitions, they've lacked first-round picks. And I know we're going to talk more about the seconds today, because it leans into what's taking place in the moment today. But I think overarching from the very beginning of the Jimmy build, what they've tried to do is use their draft picks to try to get the team either better or to repair a certain situation of some kind, to try to supplement the roster. And they haven't really thought about the draft capital aspect of the build. And so I think they've tried to, for the most part with their first round picks, improve the team. But when we go through the second round picks, I think it's a lot less about impacting the actual roster.
Yeah, it's basically, it's like the water. We should have done, you know what? We should probably pivot to this other ad today. It's like their water cleanup of Florida. Okay, they've got some schmutz, and well, it's not a direct thing. You got the schmutz, we got the guts, but it's basically like it's to repair something. Okay, it's to clean stuff up, like clean up the tax sheet, get rid of a mistake. Like that's typically what the second round picks have been used for. Now, as we get into what happened to them, one thing to recognize here when it comes to second round picks, and I say this even as it looks like they might have hit on a second round pick in Pelle Larsson this year. If you look at the Heat over the past decade plus, they've found more contributors as undrafted players than they have as second rounders. And some of that is because they didn't have second round picks. But really, the only second round picks who've made major contributions to the Heat since 2008 are Mario Chalmers, who was way up at the top of the second round and ended up starting 82 games as a rookie and obviously contributing on. He was the key player on all four finalist teams and two champions. Well, he'll tell you that. But Mario Chalmers, 2008. Josh Richardson was picked 40th in 2015, and then Pelle Larsson this time. Other than that, there aren't a lot of second round picks who've made contributions to the Heat historically. Whereas, I mean, we can go through the list from Ike Austin to Bruce Bowen to Anthony Carter to Hassan Whiteside to Tyler Johnson to Caleb Martin to Max Strus to Malik Allen. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of these guys who've been undrafted. To Udonis Haslem, Gabe Vincent, and now obviously, and Duncan Robinson, the leading 3-point shooter in their history. And now, Drew Smith, okay, another one that obviously is, and Haywood Highsmith, who is starting.
The list is unbelievable. And it's actually very impressive to see you rattle all those off, not even chronologically. It shows why
Roddy Magruder.
It shows why they devalued second-round picks. I mean, thank you for that.
Well, no, we're going to do that episode, Greg, because we're going to actually get into this idea of once these guys leave Miami, who has actually performed at a level to the same degree that he did in Miami or better, and that list is much shorter than the list that I just read off. So that's another topic, and that gets into why I have said that they don't need to overpay those guys, which lately they haven't, although they tried to with Caleb, and his agent didn't take the money. And Highsmith, it looks like they got him on a very good contract. Max, they decided to let walk to a much bigger contract. And Gabe, it looks like they dodged a bullet there by not giving him what he wanted initially. So we'll do that topic. But the overall point is they've hit on so many undrafteds, and their scouting staff is so good at that they don't necessarily need the second-round pick in a lot of situations. They just kind of hope that guys slip out like they did with Keyshawn Johnson, right? Like they might have taken Keyshawn Johnson with their second-round pick if Larson wasn't there. They ended up getting him afterwards. Tyler Johnson's a great example of that one also because they really liked him. He had a bad Portsmouth camp, and so he slipped out of the second round, and then they immediately signed him. And whatever we thought of what Tyler ended up getting money-wise, the fact is Tyler Johnson was an effective player for the Miami Heat and contributed for a number of years. So the thing is, the second-round picks for the actual player have not been that valuable to the Heat overall because they've been able to make up for it with what their scouting staff does with the undrafteds in a different way. With that being said, you're right. As currency, it seems to matter. As the sweetener in a trade, it seems to matter. And so here's what it looks like, okay?
Before you go into that, I just want to sneak this in here about what they mean for the Heat. I also think that the Heat are starting to prove that they've kind of got this draft thing figured out. And so going forward, I think second round picks actually do matter in a bigger way than just sweeteners to deals because the Heat are proving time and time again that they don't miss on their picks. Khalil Ware, obviously, we're going to see, but Larson has slid right in there as a second round pick. So I just think going forward that they might be able to pluck guys out of the second round where it matters on the court, as well as what we're about to get into.
And that's one of the reasons we thought they should keep their second rounder this year. And they did keep it. And it looks like they've got a contributor in Larson, who actually, when he's been healthy, has outplayed their first round pick from 2023, Jaime Jaquez. And to a certain degree, he's outplayed Nikola Jovic, with the exception of this last game, which is another topic in time. We got a lot of topics we build up here for some of the off days. Okay, here's how Jablanka he set it up for us, and we checked this all out. This all does check out. So let's go through where these second round picks went. Okay. All right. They traded. Let's go all the way back to, I think, would the Ariza be the first one or KZ the first one? Anyway, we don't necessarily go into the order. They traded Myers Leonard, and this was after that situation with the Twitch, stream and
playing video
what
games,
Myers
saying dumb stuff.
and the video game. Right. And they had Myers signed to this extra year, right? Was it like a $10 million, something along those lines? They traded Myers and a 27 second round pick to OKC for Trevor Ariza. Now, Ariza was essentially like the plug-in guy at the 4, where they're trying to catch lightning in a bottle. They didn't have Crowder anymore. And this was before they went out and got PJ Tucker. Ariza did not play that well. Particularly in the playoffs. That team got eliminated in the first round, swept, right, by Milwaukee. This was that year. They had a hole at that position.
The argument here, we're going to find some of these that I don't think have necessarily as reasonable of arguments, but Myers Leonard was also a PR nightmare at the time. So I guess, like, if we're going to get into these, and this is the first one we hit on, if there's any of them that are forgivable, it's kind of, you understand that they were going for a Jay Crowder replacement in Ariza, but also they had to get Myers Leonard out of the organization, really.
They did at that time, and I know Myers has fully apologized for that. He's done a lot of work in the community, and I had an affinity for Myers when he was playing for the Heat, and to me the whole situation was just, I'll just leave it as unfortunate in a number of different ways. It wasn't the way that you wanted Myers' tenure here to end in Miami. He was actually one of the most gracious people with the fans and all that, but again, I'm not going to forgive the particular incident, so we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. Okay. Let's go to one more, and then on the other side of this, we'll continue it. They traded KZ Okpala, the 25 first-round pick, the 26 second-round pick to OKC to get their 23 first-round pick back. This saga with OKC and the first-round picks has been going on for a long time. Let's address the KZ part of this. KZ, just like Ariza, and this will be the case with the two other players we're going to talk about that were part of these second-round pick deals. KZ and Ariza, KZ hasn't done anything since he left Miami. He ended up in Sacramento briefly or whatever.
Now he's out of the league.
Out of the league. It was a busted second-round pick. As we talk about second-round picks not contributing, my understanding on that was that the team president was higher on that player than the scouting staff was. I think you had the same information on that.
That's correct. Yeah.
He was kind of I don't know. KZ, there was a lot of physical ability there. It's just he never looked like he was in the right place. I don't. Let's just put it this way. I'm not sure what Pat saw in retrospect, but he saw something. And they had given up 2 additional. We talk about where second round picks went that year, right? Didn't they give up 2 second round picks to move up to take KZ? If we look all the way back to
Indiana. There was a whole trade with them. Yeah, that was. I mean, we talk about picks, and we won't get into that as much, but yeah, that took 2 of them.
That took 2 of them from the past. So they ended up giving up 3 second round picks for 1 to take KZ to move up, which is a very unheat-like move. So there was clearly a fascination with this player who didn't turn out to work out. Okay. But here's the part of that. They got their 23 first-round pick back in the deal. So if you like Jaime Jaquez and think he has a future, then this trade actually worked out because you wouldn't have had a pick in that draft because I think that one was going to be given away. It was the same deal as what happens with 25 and 26, where that was given away if it was out of the lottery, which it was. Okay, so
they were deferring that situation, and now we live in that reality today.
Correct. But they have Jaime Jaquez on the roster. And again, if they can get Jaime moving back the right direction, that he's an asset for them or outside the organization. All right, why don't we just finish this before the break, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, then the trade of Dwayne Dedmon and a 28 second-round pick to the Spurs for cash, which I believe they ended up taking back the minimum in cash that you could get back. This was a salary dump. Okay, this was sort of like the Joel Anthony move way back when, except the difference was Joel didn't throw a massage gun. The Dedmon era, sort of like the Lowry era, ended with a player, and we talked about this with Myers Leonard. Sometimes it's just a player that they have to get off the roster for one way or another. And this was kind of the case with Dedmon. They signed him, if you remember, to that extra year, which people kind of questioned at the time, similarly to what they just did with Thomas Bryant, where they signed him. Well, in Bryant's case, he opted out, and then they signed him again. And they ended up moving Bryant. In this case, it's for a swap of seconds. It's not for.
See, they're improving. They're not giving up seconds. They're just swapping them.
They're swapping it, but I'm not clear on this one. And I probably should have researched it before the show. Does the swap, is it Miami's choice or Indiana's choice on the swap?
I would imagine it has to be Miami's choice. That's the only way it makes sense, but it's not until 20.
No. It could make sense if it was Indiana's
I guess
choice.
You're right. If they're just wanting to shed salary and Indiana's willing to pay him, maybe you're right. Yeah, that hasn't been mentioned yet about who has the right to swap, but it's 2031 is the pick confirmed.
Okay. I mean, I'll be long gone by then. Anyway, okay. So, all right. So Dedmon and a second. Okay. So the Dedmon experience, again, this was a case of the Heat went out and got a player in Dedmon off his couch, essentially. He gave them very good play at first. People forget that. And then the second year was kind of a disaster, right? In a whole bunch of different ways. He was actually their best player in the playoff series against the Bucks. We talked about the Ariza series. Remember that one game? Like he just went he had like the game of his life. Okay. Traded Dedmon and a 28 second round pick to the Spurs for cash. But essentially this was to give them a little bit more space up against the luxury tax. Okay. That's it. And that's not just people say, well, they're cheap. There are reasons to do this. Like it's not just the luxury tax penalties in terms of the cash that your owner or whatever has to pay. It's also that you're trying to stay away from that second apron, okay, so that you still have the use of all these various vehicles that are taken away from you if you're in the second apron. And here's one more. They traded Oladipo and a 29 second and a 30 second, so two, to OKC for cash. This was a second apron luxury tax move, right?
Yeah.
He's also never played again.
To that point, though, like this one sticks out to me as really about saving money because to give up second round picks in consecutive years just to dump a player. And I understand he wasn't going to play again in that season. And he was on a pretty substantial, I think $10 million was around $9 million was what he was making at the time. So, you multiply that with luxury tax concerns. I also think we have to be careful giving too much credit for the shedding of these players for the punitive reasons of the salary cap and the second apron, because some of this was done prior to that agreement being in place. So they didn't necessarily have, they probably knew it was coming down the pike, but they didn't necessarily have it in place at the time. But yeah, this is the one that sticks out to me as really one where they just kind of shed salary and saved money. And now they'll have less picks going forward.
I think it's fair for you to make that distinction. I think that this looks like when Jablonka tweets this, it looks worse in the aggregate because it's like, okay, dump to 27 second, dump to 26 second, dump to 28 second, dump to 29 second, dump to 30 second. Of course, they got a 30 when they got one of them, which is the one they got from the Lakers. So they have the one, the Lakers one is
2026.
Right. The 2026 one is from
It's 2026. That's the only second round pick they have until 2031, which is now the one that they, I think, have the right to swap with Indiana.
Okay. In the aggregate, this looks like a lot.
Yeah. Because you have none for it feels like half a decade.
Right. And you also don't have the first round pick, right, that you gave up along with the Lowry contract to try to give yourself a chance last year with Rozier. So it is a lot. And on the other side of this, we'll get into how they operate in this space. But we wanted to do this exercise because there was a specific, they're not just standing out on the street corner saying, hey, take our second round picks. Like the second round picks were basically used, like we say, as currency to solve problems. Whether or not you're up against a tax limit, up against an apron, have a player that just is not a good fit in your locker room anymore. Like that's what they use these things for. Again, figuring that they could find a Keyshawn Johnson or Drew Smith or another Haywood Highsmith or another Duncan Robinson, and they've proven they are very good at that.
Yeah, they
but
have.
But they have, but you can't trade to the Nets like you can't when you want like let's say you wanted Dennis Schroeder. I'm not saying they did. I'm saying you can't trade to the Nets. Here, you're going to take our next two undrafteds. Okay, the next two guys we develop in Sioux Falls, we're promising these guys to you. Unfortunately, that's not how that works. So
they'd have a treasure
I get,
trove if that was the case.
Right. Here, we're going to give you Adam Simon and the rest of our scouting staff for 3 months. You could rent them and send them back to us after Summer League. No, that's not how this works. All right. Here is how it works if you want to bet legally in the state of Florida. You could go to that other place. I get it. Okay. Or you cannot give away your money for free. Because if you go to BettorEdge, there's no VIG. So BettorEdge.com, use the code 5RSN. That's BettorEdge.com. Use the code 5RSN. You get $20 to play right away. It's a sports betting marketplace. It means that you can find the line that you want. We also run competitions there regularly. We're actually running one as we speak today on the $5 entry, and you can win the entire pot. And we're giving away a free subscription for the entire year to Off the Floor. So we talk about Off the Floor all the time. You can go check it out. All you got to do is win this thing, and you also get some money. So BettorEdge.com. Use the code 5RSN. That's with 2 T's, OR, BettorEdge.com. All right, so their current position, in light of this, you mentioned it. They've essentially got 2 second-round picks all the way through 2031. Their first-round situation is they have this 2025. They will give it away if they're not in the lottery. Otherwise, it goes away next year. Okay,
unprotected. Yeah,
unprotected. Beyond that, and then the 2027 pick is going to Charlotte. Here's the protections on that. It's protected for selections 1 through 14 in 2027. So basically lottery protected. Conveyable if Miami conveys a first round pick to OKC in 2028 and unprotected in 2028. So essentially, for those who don't understand the Stepien rule, there was an owner who owned the Cleveland Cavaliers, Ted Stepien, who basically was just giving away first round picks. Just F them picks, okay, as the Rams said a couple of years ago, right? As Chris Greer was saying for a little while with the Dolphins. F them picks. So you're essentially giving away all these picks. The NFL and NFL. NBA put in a rule that you can't give away your first round pick in successive years. And this creates all these problems with these protections because and that's been the whole thing with OKC, because you're like, you can't give them away consecutive. So if you're giving away one, and let's say you give a pick away because it meets the protection threshold, then you can't the next year. So it just makes it a little bit more complicated for trades. The Rozier pick will be given away by 2028 one way or another. But again, if the OKC pick doesn't convey till 2026, then that pick can't be given away in 2027, regardless of the protections and whether the Heat make the playoffs or don't make the playoffs. So it's going to be 2028.
The overall story is up. Not to interrupt
exactly the point. No, you should interrupt because that's the point. Okay, it locks your picks up. It makes it harder to move picks now because you don't know the future, so you don't know necessarily if you're going to be giving up the 2025 picks or not. So all of this is to say, they don't have a lot of picks. They just don't. And again, we can argue each of these situations individually, but this has been, to a certain degree, the cost of doing business in the Jimmy Butler era. In some cases, it's been a mistake, which the Rozier trade may turn out to be a mistake, which neither you or I thought at the time. So I'm not going to, it's hard for me to go in on them. I was wrong. And these other ones, again, we can say, well, they could have held on to Dwayne Dedmon. They didn't have to get, but they have a specific reason for doing all of these things the way they did it. So it comes to this, Greg, as trade season starts, like how do they even operate now? Because they don't have a lot to give up. And how does this lead into your feeling about what they do with Jimmy? Because it all comes back to Jimmy. Because some fans would say this: A, they should have traded the likes of Caleb and Gabe and Max at their various deadlines and replenished their second round pick treasure trove. They're not going to do that because they always push forward. And keeping Max and Gabe, by the way, proved valuable when the team made a run, to the finals.
What Caleb Martin did in Game 7 in Boston is more valuable to the Heat organization than a single or even probably 2 second-round draft picks. Just get used to it, folks.
Well, what fans would say to that is Max and Gabe. That was the year that Max and Gabe were going to be free agents. So if Heat fans, the counter to that would be, well, see, Caleb wasn't a free agent after that year, but you could have gotten a second-round pick for Max and Gabe. But Max and Gabe ended up starting in the finals because you didn't have Tyler. You're not making the finals if you traded one of those guys for just a second-round pick. You're not. So that was the trade-off. Last year, it's all hindsight. Last year, they should have traded Caleb. Well, yeah, the team didn't make the finals. They got eliminated in the first round. So it's having it both ways here. How are the Heat? I mean, the Heat went, with they went with status quo to push forward, and it worked the year before. It didn't work the year after. Okay, that's going to happen. But so that leads fans to say, okay, well, if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to try to recoup some second round picks, then go get some first rounders for currency, and that means basically pivoting and moving Jimmy Butler. And what we're hearing from the Heat, and I've been hearing from the Heat, is we're not going to do it unless we're blown away. And blown away to me means NBA ready rotation or starting level players plus draft picks. You need to have a headline piece that's going to replace Jimmy, maybe not to Jimmy's level, but pretty damn close, and draft picks. And then maybe there's a conversation here, but it's not just we're just dumping Jimmy for future picks, or we're dumping Jimmy, just for expiring contracts that can't help us. That's not the direction they're going to go. But when you look at this in totality, does it make you think maybe at some point they need to make that trade they've never really made, which is go get a bunch of first rounders so that you can use it on somebody else?
It's tough to say that because I also don't think that Eric Spoelstra, Bam Adebayo, I mean, the way Tyler Hero is playing right now, I also don't think that you are that far away from kind of reshaping this and being able to remain competitive. And I know how much they prioritize remaining competitive. So it may be less about maybe the Jimmy trade that lands them all the picks back at once, and more maybe being more opportunistic in individual moves here or there to try to get a pick back. Or you just kind of got to make it through this lean period and then don't make those same mistakes again where you're constantly trading picks with protections and things like that. I think if you went back and could do it again, maybe less protections would actually have been more it kind of would have made the waters less muddy. I guess I'm a little wishy-washy here because I would expect a Jimmy Butler trade to be about remaining competitive. I just don't see them going in a completely let's just have a bunch of young players and draft picks. But to your point, the reason why they haven't necessarily been able to land this whole notion of what this build could have been was kind of after the Lowry trade happened, which Jimmy Butler wanted, and let's all make sure we always reiterate that. It kind of became apparent that maybe the next step to this was bringing in a 1A to Jimmy and then taking a stab at it. And the Dame trade was an example where they didn't have necessarily the picks to get that done. And it's been other players where to get in the conversation for Kevin Durant, do you even have enough picks to get in that conversation when it's taking place? I think that there are valid concerns about how are you going to supplement Bam and Tyler after Jimmy if Jimmy isn't the guy that gets you the picks that maybe gets you the next player. So it's multiple moves. It's a domino effect. I just would expect them to try to remain competitive. And so less about because sometimes it's a little worrisome if you're going to get back multiple first round picks that project to be late first round draft picks. How valuable really are those? So I would think a competitive player coming back is going to be a part of that conversation. I just think that maybe you have to get to a place where, like they did with Thomas Bryant, they didn't use a second to get rid of him. They found a way to swap. Maybe you just have to, around the margins, be less just so willing to just dole out picks on command.
Well, there's the other part of this as we close, and we'll do more of this as trade season starts and get into specific players that they could target and what they could get for Rozier. These are certainly topics that we're going to hit on. But the overall point here, too, is that there are some teams that are so stockpiled with first-round picks that sometimes I think trying to go that route to have these first-rounders to compete, you're never going to get enough anyway. Like maybe that sounds defeatist, but I think it also informs your strategy here because I mean, how are you going to get in the if OKC wants a player, OKC's going to get the player. And I understand it's not that attractive a destination for a lot of people, even if they're winning. But look at all the picks. I mean, they made one trade of Paul George. They got a guy who could be the league MVP this year in that trade. They also got a pick that turned out to be Jalen Williams, who is now a most improved player candidate, and I hope that hits because that was my pick in Vegas this year. And then they got 5 additional first-round picks. I mean, you look at some of these teams in the West have done that decided to say, okay, we're going to take a step back. Similarly, Utah's another one. New Orleans is another one. Similarly to, and they may get more picks now back for Ingram if they end up making that trade. But similarly to what, if you look a few years ago where it was Houston, Detroit, Orlando that decided to pull back, okay? And now we're seeing Orlando and Houston have cashed in with really good young players who are now sort of coming up into their early prime. Detroit, it hasn't worked out quite as well, but they have some pieces. Then the next cycle was these other teams, like we mentioned. OKC, which has them, just till the end. I mean, they've already come up and they have more picks. They've already put together a possible championship winning core. They supplemented it with Caruso, which they didn't even have to give up picks that we thought they were going to have to give up. Hartenstein, who they signed, they still have all these picks. So if you're the Heat, what are you offering? Well, you're offering a stable winning organization, possible, centerpiece type players, even if maybe not arguably top 10 players in Bam and Tyler, right? Ability to draft and supplement well, no state tax, okay? Again, the tradition of the organization and everything else that Miami offers. That's what you're offering. And it's still a pretty damn good package for a player who's looking at it. But even if OKC, which is basically one street in Bricktown, where if they're going to have a parade, they would have had to go back and forth, and one restaurant that's decent there, which is Mantle. Sorry, people of OKC. If you're going, even though that's what you're offering, if you're offering a team, 4 first-round picks, how are they going to get into that conversation? Right. So that's why I'm okay, I understand that you want to have a little bit more pick currency here. But that's not the game that you can play. You're never going to have enough unless you do one thing, trade Bam, which is really what this comes back to. If you're going to trade Bam, right? But Tyler's not going to recoup what Bam's going to recoup even now. We would agree on that, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, if you're talking about a real stripped down completely rebuild, obviously Bam would net you premium draft capital, I guess I would call it. You have to be in a situation where you have to just think about how did the Heat build their best, most winning teams? They either drafted Dwayne, drafted Bam, or they got a really unique situation where Jimmy Butler said yes, and they got him without any cap space. This is the thing. Dame, the whole thing about lists and players saying they want to come to you, that's been flipped on its head for me because Dame had one team on his list and he made it super public and it still didn't happen. So at this point, you're in a weird spot where nothing is guaranteed on how you build. So it's almost like you have to rely on a really high pick at some point, or you got to get lucky with a free agent or a trade of some kind.
It has changed the equation because it always was, you can't build from the middle. That was the expression in the NBA for years. You got to bottom out. You got to go from there. It's never been the Heat's philosophy. They, when they tried it in 07, 08, it wasn't even their intention going into the season. And then everything fell apart. And then, then they wanted Rose, but then, they ended up losing the lottery to Chicago. They ended up with Beasley, and sort of the rest is history there. There's no one perfect way to do this. You basically hire the best people you can to handle the cap, handle the tax, handle the personnel side, do the scouting, and then you try to sort of get as high up as you can in all these different areas. But the one area they're never going to get up high enough in is just stockpiling picks, which is what, by the way, the Dolphins did. I know different cap, different situation, but that's basically what they did. They stripped the thing down, right? Okay. So there's a good example in the same market. They stripped the thing down. They made the Laramie Tunsil trade. They got all of these picks, right? And yes, they did flip some of those picks then for Tyreek Hill. They also made a lot of bad picks with the players that they got. And right now, I'm going to a Dolphins pregame show, and the team is 6-7, 5 years into this rebuild. So there's an example right here in this market. Again, different sport, different cap, different parameters.
But there's
then,
NBA teams too.
Right. There's NBA teams too. They're stripping it down as work. Whereas the Panthers did this different thing where they re-signed Barkov and all the rest of this. They made a trade of Huberdeau. They got in Kachuk, and they kind of did build from the middle, and now they're a powerhouse. So I think sometimes we get into these absolutes about how you can build. The one absolute I will give is the Heat will never be in a situation under this regime where they've got all these picks to just send to everybody else. It's not. They've made adjustments to their philosophy. They value the draft more than they did before. They do, but they're never going to dump everybody, and that's why people again say just trade Bam. Would you get 3 first-round picks for Bam? I think you might still. I think you might. You got 5 for Mikal Bridges,
especially
right?
if you were trading him quietly. But they're never going to ever do that, and that's why I love them. Because if you look back over the course of the last Jimmy Butler years, compare their results year over year versus most of the teams stockpiling picks, and I'll take what Miami's been through since 2019 versus the Timberwolves or the Jazz or even Oklahoma City, frankly. Like the Heat have been further and celebrated maybe not the ultimate goal, but celebrated a lot more high-quality wins at the very top than those organizations have. They just have.
Well, OKC needs to make it back to a finals. Like this is Presti's second build where he's gotten really good players in the draft, but it's been through 2012 since 2012, right? Yeah, since they've been in the finals. So there's no guarantees with any of this stuff. We just wanted to make it clear as this starts, the Heat are not operating with a war chest, and I think sometimes people forget that. And if they traded their last 2 second-round picks for Dennis Schroeder, and they don't make it to the finals, people are like, well, why did they go all in on the Jimmy build with the last of their second-round picks? I just think we needed to put this into perspective. And also, the last dynasty in the NBA, if you want to call it that, Golden State, they built through the middle. They got, you look at where they took Curry, Clay, Draymond was a second-round pick. Like, they built through the middle. That team did not bottom out to get where they got. And then, of course, they added Kevin Durant in an accounting glitch, basically, by the league. All right. The accounting glitch is strong. The cap exploded. Okay, we've done too much already. Thanks to Greg. We'll do more episodes, obviously, on trade stuff as it comes forward, but we wanted to put some of this stuff into perspective. Thanks to our sponsors, BettorEdge, 5RSN, Prize Picks. Use the code 5.